I've been a forest ranger for 35 years. I'm retired now. My name is Paul. People think a man like me who spent his whole life under the canopy of giants has seen everything the wilderness has to offer. They're wrong. There are some things you see that you don't talk about. Not because you're scared of being called a liar, but because putting words to it feels like a betrayal. It makes something sacred feel small. But silence is a heavy thing to carry into old age. It weighs on you until you either let it go or it buries you. This happened back in '88. I was 38, fit, and I knew the Cascades like the back of my hand. I was on a solo patrol, a 5-day loop in a section of the national forest that rarely saw hikers. It was late September. The air had that crisp, clean edge to it, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. The light was golden, slanting through the Douglas firs in long, dusty rays. It was quiet. Too quiet. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Usually, a forest is full of sound if you just stop to listen. Squirrels chattering, jays scolding, the hum of insects. But that afternoon, there was nothing. It was a deep, profound silence that felt like the world was holding its breath. I stopped walking, my hand resting on the worn stock of my rifle. It wasn't a threatening silence, not yet. It was just empty. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, that old instinct that tells you you're being watched. I scanned the trees, the deep shadows between the ancient trunks. Nothing. Just the immense silent woods. I kept moving, trying to shake the feeling. An hour later, I smelled it. It was a smell that didn't belong there. It was heavy, musky, and vaguely foul, like a wet animal mixed with something rotting. It wasn't a bear. I'd smelled plenty of bears, dead and alive. This was different. It was stronger, more primal. It clung to the air in patches, and the wind couldn't seem to wash it away. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, but my job was to push forward, to investigate. That's when I found the tracks. They were in a patch of soft mud near a creek bed. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt down, my fingers hovering over the edge of one of the prints. It was massive, at least 16 inches long, shaped like a human foot but broader, thicker. The impression was deep, suggesting immense weight. There were 5 toes, clearly defined. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They came out of the dense woods on one side of the creek, crossed the water in a single stride that I couldn't have made, and disappeared into the thick undergrowth on the other side. My own boot, a size 11, looked like a child's next to it. This was no bear, and it was no hoax. The weight distribution, the way the mud was displaced, it was real. I stood up slowly, my hand now gripping my rifle tightly. The silence was still there, but now it felt charged, heavy with presence. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever made these tracks was still nearby, watching me. The sun was beginning to dip below the ridge, and long, distorted shadows stretched across the forest floor. The air grew colder. I should have made camp, but I couldn't. I couldn't stay there. I decided to head back towards the trail, moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to make a sound. Every snapped twig under my boots sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. The feeling of being watched intensified until it was a physical pressure against my skin. I didn't look behind me. I just kept my eyes forward, scanning the trees ahead. And then I saw it. It wasn't a clear view. It was for a split second, maybe 2. About 100 yards away, standing between 2 massive cedars, was a shape. It was tall, much taller than a man, and covered in dark matted hair. It was standing perfectly still, almost blending into the deep shadows. It wasn't an animal. The way it stood, the posture, it was intelligent. It was aware. It turned its head slightly, and for a single, heart-stopping moment, I felt its gaze lock onto mine. I couldn't see its eyes clearly, but I felt them. It was a look that wasn't aggressive or curious. It was ancient, knowing, and deeply sad. And felt like it was looking right through me, seeing all the noise and fear of my small human world. I didn't raise my rifle. The thought never even crossed my mind. In that moment, I wasn't a ranger with a gun. I was an intruder. I was a small, fragile thing in a world that was far older and stranger than I had ever imagined. The creature simply held my gaze for another second. Then it turned its massive shoulders and stepped back into the shadows between the trees. It didn't run. It just vanished. One moment it was there, a solid, breathing giant, and the next, there was nothing but the forest. The silence broke. A bird called out somewhere above me. The wind rustled the leaves. The forest came back to life, but it was different. I was different. I walked the 3 miles back to my last campsite in a daze, the encounter playing over and over in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a tree, my rifle across my lap, and just listened to the sounds of the woods, wondering what else was hidden in its depths. I never filed a report. I couldn't. What would I have said? That I saw a ghost in the trees? That I felt the soul of the forest look back at me? They would have sent me for a psychological evaluation. So I kept it locked away. But that day changed me. I never looked at the wilderness the same way again. It's not just a collection of trees and animals, it's a living thing with secrets it keeps. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough and unlucky enough, it shows you one of them. Not to scare you, but to remind you that you are just a visitor here. A very, very small visitor. For the rest of my patrol, I was a different man. I wasn't a ranger anymore. I was prey. Every rustle in the undergrowth made my muscles seize. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape that was too tall, too broad. The familiar comfort of the woods, a place where I had felt more at home than anywhere else on earth, was gone. It had been replaced by a raw, primal fear that I had only ever read about. The forest was no longer my sanctuary. It was its territory. I felt like a trespasser, a mouse scurrying through a lion's den. I made it back to my truck just as the last light faded from the sky. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine turning over was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I didn't even pack up my main camp properly. I just threw my gear in the back and drove, the tires spitting gravel. I didn't stop until the dirt road hit pavement and I could see the distant glow of town lights. The next morning, I had to check in at the station. My supervisor, a man named Dennis who had been a ranger even longer than I had, was sitting at his desk, nursing a cup of coffee. Dennis was a practical man, built like a small boulder, with a face that looked like it had been carved from oak. He knew the woods and he knew his people. He looked up as I walked in and his brow furrowed slightly. "You're back early, Paul," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Everything all right out in Section 9? I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. This was my chance. My duty was to report any unusual signs, any potential dangers. A creature of that size was a potential danger, but the words wouldn't come. I imagined myself trying to explain it. "Well, Dennis, I saw a 16-inch footprint and then I saw an 8-foot-tall hair-covered man-ape that stared into my soul. I would be the laughingstock of the Forest Service. They would have me doing desk duty and psychological screenings until I retired. My 30 years of service, my reputation as a steady, reliable man, would evaporate in one unbelievable story. Everything's fine," I heard myself say. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "Just a quiet patrol. Thought I'd get a jump on the paperwork." Dennis stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. He knew something was off. I could see it in the way his gaze lingered. I probably looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way I had. "You look pale," he said finally. "Get some rest. You look like you need it." I just nodded and retreated to my own desk, feeling his eyes on my back. That was the moment the secret truly took root. It wasn't just my experience anymore. It was a lie I had to protect, a wall I had to build around myself. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. When I did, my dreams were filled with silent, dark woods and the feeling of being watched by ancient, sorrowful eyes. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the heavy silence of the forest filling my bedroom. During the day, I was jumpy, irritable. I flinched at sudden noises. My wife at the time kept asking me what was wrong. I told her it was just stress from the job. Another lie to build the wall higher. I considered going back. The scientist in me, the ranger, wanted proof. A cast of the footprint, a hair sample, a photograph. But the man who had stood there, who had felt that gaze, was terrified. It wasn't a fear of being attacked, it was a deeper, more reverent fear. The feeling that I had stumbled into a church I wasn't meant to be in, that I had witnessed something sacred and private. To go back with cameras and plaster felt like a violation. It felt wrong. The experience drew a line in my life. There was the man I was before that day and the man I became after. Before, the wilderness was something to be managed, understood, and mapped. It was beautiful and dangerous, but it was knowable. After, it was a mystery. I realized how little we actually knew. We walk on the thin crust of civilization thinking we've conquered the world. But just beyond the streetlights, in the deep, quiet places, there are things that have been there for thousands of years, living by rules we can't even begin to comprehend. I continued my career for another 20 years. I was a good ranger. I did my job. But I never went back to that section of the forest. When patrols were assigned there, I always found a reason to trade. Dennis never asked why. I think in his own way, he knew not to. The weight of that secret has shaped the man I am today. It isolated me. It made me quieter, more withdrawn. How can you share the small talk of the world when you're carrying the knowledge of a giant that walks in the shadows? It's a profound loneliness. People talk about Bigfoot hunters in TV shows, and they laugh. They treat it like a joke, a campfire story. I just stay quiet, because I know it's not a story, and it's not a monster. It's a sad, ancient thing that wants only to be left alone, and I broke its trust. I saw it, and that glance we shared was a burden I've had to carry in silence ever since. For the rest of my patrol, I was a different man. I wasn't a ranger anymore. I was prey. Every rustle in the undergrowth made my muscles seize. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape that was too tall, too broad. The familiar comfort of the woods, a place where I had felt more at home than anywhere else on earth, was gone. It had been replaced by a raw, primal fear that I had only ever read about. The forest was no longer my sanctuary. It was its territory. I felt like a trespasser, a mouse scurrying through a lion's den. The years that followed were a long, slow lesson in how to live with a ghost. My marriage crumbled not with a bang, but with a quiet, steady erosion. My wife Sarah was a good woman, but she was married to a man who had left a part of himself in the woods and refused to say what it was. She saw the change in me, the way I'd sit by the window for hours just staring at the tree line, the way I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing from a dream I couldn't explain. She'd ask, "Paul, what is it? Talk to me." And I'd just shake my head. How could I tell her? How could I bridge the gap between our normal life of bills and groceries and an 8-foot-tall creature with ancient, sorrowful eyes? I couldn't. So a chasm opened between us, and one day it was simply too wide to cross. She left, and I can't say I blamed her. She deserved a whole man, and I wasn't one anymore. My old man, a logger who'd spent 50 years in the forests of Oregon, used to say that some truths are too big for one person to carry alone. They either crush you or you have to share the weight. I was being crushed and I knew it, but I chose the pressure over the risk of ridicule. At work, I became a shadow of my former self. I was still competent, still did my patrols, but the joy was gone. The wilderness had been my cathedral, a place of peace. Now it was a place of constant low-grade vigilance. I found myself avoiding the deep woods, the old-growth stands where the silence felt too much like that day. I'd volunteer for trail maintenance near the park entrances or paperwork back at the station. Dennis knew. He never said a word, but he'd assign me the easier routes without me having to ask. One afternoon, years after the incident, he and I were sharing a thermos of coffee on the station porch. Another ranger, a young hotshot named Scott, was inside, bragging about tracking a cougar. Dennis just watched him, then turned to me. "You know, Paul," he said, his voice quiet, "this job isn't about conquering the woods. It's about learning to live alongside them. And sometimes that means respecting what you don't understand." It was the closest he ever came to acknowledging my secret. It was his way of telling me he knew something had happened out there, and he wasn't going to press it. It was a small kindness, but it felt immense. Other rangers noticed too. An old-timer named Frank, who was close to retirement when I was in my prime, once pulled me aside after a staff meeting. He was a wiry man with hands like gnarled roots. "You used to have a different look in your eye, Paul," he said, squinting at me. "Like you were listening to the forest song. Now you look like you're just waiting for it to scream." He was right. I was always waiting. I had heard the deep note in the symphony of the wild, the one that doesn't belong, and I could never unhear it. My retirement wasn't a celebration. It was a retreat. I moved to a small house on the edge of town, far enough from the dense forest that I didn't feel its presence looming over me every night. For years, the secret stayed buried. It became a dull ache, a scar so old I sometimes forgot how I got it. Then, about 6 months ago, I saw a news report. A young man, a college student named Christopher, had gone missing while hiking solo. They showed his picture, a smiling kid full of life. Then they showed a map of the search area. It was Section 9, my section. My blood ran cold. I sat there frozen, as the news anchor talked about the challenging terrain and the lack of any clues. They interviewed a local sheriff who said, "We've found no signs of foul play, no tracks of any large predators. It's as if he just vanished." I knew that feeling, I knew that emptiness. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in 30 years. A terrible, sickening guilt. Did I have a responsibility? Should I have said something all those years ago? If I had filed a report, would that area have been marked differently? Restricted? Would that boy still be alive? The questions gnawed at me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My father's words about sharing the weight of a heavy truth echoed in my mind. I started watching those Bigfoot shows on television, the ones with night vision cameras and dramatic music. I'd always scoffed at them, at the noise and the arrogance of the hunters trying to trap something so far beyond them. They were looking for a monster, an animal. They were missing the point entirely. They hadn't seen the sadness in its eyes, the profound intelligence that wasn't human but was undeniably real. It wasn't a beast to be hunted. It was a remnant of another world, and we were the invaders. Seeing them crashing through the woods, yelling and setting up traps, felt like a desecration. It made me angry. It made me realize that my silence wasn't protecting it. It was just protecting me. It was cowardice, plain and simple. And maybe my cowardice had cost that young man his life. That's a weight I can't carry anymore. The crushing is finally over. It's time to share it. The decision to speak felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. For 2 days after seeing the news report about the missing boy, Christopher, I did nothing. I just sat in my worn armchair, the TV off, and let the silence of my small house press in on me. It was a different kind of silence than the one in the woods. This one was filled with the ghosts of my own choices, the echoes of words I never said. My father's old saying about heavy truths wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a diagnosis. I was being crushed and I could feel my bones grinding under the strain. I thought about calling the sheriff's office. I picked up my old rotary phone 3 times, my finger hovering over the dial. What would I say? Sheriff, you should be looking for something that's not in your field guide. Something that leaves footprints the size of dinner plates and has eyes that hold the weight of 1,000 years. They'd thank me for my concern and hang up, flagging my name as the local crackpot. I imagined the deputies sharing a laugh at my expense. Old Ranger Paul has finally lost it. Spent too much time alone in the woods. Then I thought about the Forest Service, my old colleagues. Most of the men I knew were long gone. Dennis had passed away from a heart attack a decade ago, taking his quiet understanding with him. Frank, the wiry old-timer, had moved to Arizona to live with his daughter. The new generation of Rangers were different. They were scientists with degrees in drones. They relied on data and satellite imagery. They didn't have room in their world for stories that couldn't be quantified. They would listen politely, then file a report on my mental stability. My gaze drifted to a framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was of me and Sarah, taken on our 10th anniversary. We were smiling, but even then I could see the distance in my eyes. She had tried so hard to reach me, to pull me back from whatever dark place I had gone to after that patrol in '88. But I had built my wall of silence too high. I had protected my secret, and in doing so, I had pushed away the only person who might have helped me carry it. The guilt for Christopher was new and sharp, but the guilt for Sarah was a dull, chronic ache I had lived with for 20 years. I knew I couldn't speak these words. Not yet. They were too raw, too unbelievable. Saying them out loud would make them feel like a performance, a story to be judged. But I had to get them out. My old man was right. I had to share the weight. I stood up, my joints protesting, and walked to the old wooden desk in the corner of the room. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen that had been sitting in a cup for years. The ink was slow to start. My hand shook as I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote a title, Section 9, September 1988. I started writing, not for the sheriff, not for the Forest Service, but for myself. I needed to see the memory laid out in black and white, to prove to myself that it was real, that I hadn't imagined it all. I wrote about the unnatural silence, the smell on the air, the way the light slanted through the trees. I described the track in the mud, the feeling of my own boot being so small and insignificant next to it. The words poured out of me, a flood of details I thought I had buried for good. I wrote about the moment I saw it, the shape between the cedars, the turn of its head and the eyes. I spent a whole page trying to describe that look. Not animal, not human, but something other, something ancient and knowing and so profoundly sad. As I wrote, I wasn't a retired old man in a dusty house. I was 38 again, standing frozen on a forest trail, my world being cracked open like a seed pod. I wrote for hours, my hand cramping, the pages piling up on the desk. I wrote about my panicked retreat, The lie I told Dennis, the sleepless nights, the way the woods had transformed from a sanctuary into a place of fear. I wrote about Sarah leaving. I wrote everything. It was a confession. My father's words echoed in my mind. You either share the weight or it crushes you. For 30 years I'd chosen to be crushed. Now I was trying to learn how to share, even if it was just with a stack of empty pages. When I finally put the pen down, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my living room. In front of me lay a manuscript, a testament to the truth I had sacrificed my life to keep. It was all there, the whole story. I read the last line I had written. I believe it is still out there, and I believe it is connected to the disappearance of Christopher. My heart was pounding. I had finally given my ghost a voice. The question now, the one that made my blood run cold, was who was going to read it. For 3 days, the yellow legal pad sat on my desk like a verdict waiting to be read. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, but I couldn't look away either. It was a physical object now, a stack of paper filled with my cramped, urgent handwriting. My secret had weight and texture. It wasn't just a ghost in my head anymore. On the 4th morning, I made myself a pot of coffee, the bitter smell filling my small kitchen, and I sat down and read the whole thing from the beginning. It was like watching a movie of my own life, a scene I had tried to burn from my memory. Page after page, the silence of the forest in '88 seeped out of the words and into my quiet living room. I could feel the snap of the twig under my boot, smell the strange, musky scent on the air that was like damp soil and wet fur. When I got to the part about its eyes, my hand started to shake and I had to put my coffee mug down. I had written that they were filled with a sadness so deep it felt like a geological feature, something carved by time and loss. Reading it back, I knew it was true. I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't dreamed it. The manuscript ended and I was left with the same cold, terrifying question. What now? This story, this confession, was useless if it stayed on my desk. It would just be another relic of my failure. I thought again of the sheriff. I imagined handing the yellow pages to a deputy half my age, watching his eyes glaze over with professional politeness as he filed it away in a drawer marked eccentric locals. I thought of my old Forest Service buddies, the new ones with their GPS units and data charts. They would analyze the paper, the ink, my grammar. They would not see the truth between the lines. They would see a man who had spent too much time alone. My mind kept circling back to the boy, Christopher, to his smiling face on the television. He had a family, a mother, a father, people whose lives had been shattered into a million pieces. The thought of approaching them was horrifying. What could I possibly offer them but a wild story that would sound like a cruel joke? I'm sorry for your loss, but I think your son was taken by a creature from folklore. It was unthinkable. It would be pouring salt into a wound that would never heal. I would be a monster to them, a crazy old man exploiting their grief. And yet, wasn't my silence a worse form of cruelty? If there was even a 1% chance that what I knew could lead to an answer, any answer, didn't I owe them that? My father's words haunted me. You either share the weight or it crushes you. I was being crushed, but I realized my silence was crushing others too. It was a weight being passed down, and now Christopher and his family were carrying it. I spent the afternoon pacing my small house, from the window overlooking the street to the back door that faced a small, tidy yard. I felt trapped. Every option seemed to lead to a dead end of ridicule or causing more pain. Defeated, I sat down and turned on my old desktop computer, the fan whirring to life with a dusty sigh. I typed Christopher's name into the search bar, just to see if there were any updates. The same news articles from months ago appeared. But then I saw something new, a link to a small local online forum. The post was from 2 weeks ago. It was from a woman who identified herself as Christopher's aunt. She wrote that the family had hired a private investigator, a man who specialized in missing persons cases in wilderness areas. She said the official search had been called off, but they weren't giving up hope. She listed a name and a phone number, a man named Victor. She was pleading for anyone who knew anything about Section 9, any old stories, any unusual experiences, no matter how small or strange, to please call. We are looking for things the authorities might have missed, she wrote. We are open to everything. My heart hammered against my ribs. Open to everything. The words seemed to glow on the screen. It wasn't a guarantee of belief, not even close, but it was a crack in the wall of silence. It was an invitation. For an hour, I just stared at the number on the screen. My hand hovered over my phone. This was it. This was the cliff edge I had been imagining. All the old fears came rushing back. The fear of being laughed at, of being dismissed, of being called a liar. The fear of what it would mean to finally let this thing out into the world. I picked up the phone. My thumb was slick with sweat as I dialed the numbers. It rang 3 times, each one a lifetime. I almost hung up. Then a man's voice, calm and steady, answered. "This is Victor." I cleared my throat. My own voice sounded rusty, foreign. "My name is Paul," I said, my eyes fixed on the stack of yellow pages on my desk. "I'm calling about the notice for Christopher. I used to be a ranger up in the Cascades. I have some information about Section 9 from a long time ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a professional silence, a patient one. I could hear him breathing, waiting. He wasn't rushing me. He wasn't laughing. "I see," Victor said finally. His voice was even, impossible to read. "I would be very interested to hear what you have to say, Paul. When would be a good time to meet?" We agreed to meet the next day at a small diner off the highway, a place called the Rusty Spoon. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed since the 70s, with cracked red vinyl booths and a thick smell of coffee and bacon grease in the air. It felt anonymous, a place where stories could be told without sticking to the walls. I arrived 15 minutes early, my hands trembling slightly as I slid the yellow legal pad out of my canvas bag. I placed it on the table in front of me. It looked absurdly out of place next to the salt shaker and the sticky menu. My whole life's secret condensed into a stack of paper. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want, just to have something to do with my hands. Every time the bell over the door jingled, my stomach tightened. I was watching the reflection in the window when he walked in. Victor was not what I expected. He wasn't a hard-boiled detective from a novel. He was a man in his late 40s, I guessed, with a quiet, unassuming presence. He wore a simple jacket over a plain shirt and jeans. He could have been an accountant or a high school teacher, but it was his eyes that held my attention. They were calm, patient, and they seemed to miss nothing. He scanned the room once, spotted me, and walked over. "Paul?" he asked, his voice the same as it was on the phone, steady and even. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I just gestured to the seat opposite me. He sat down without any wasted motion. He didn't offer a handshake. He just looked at me for a moment. Then his eyes drifted down to the manuscript on the table. He didn't say anything about it. A waitress came over and he ordered a glass of water. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was professional, like a doctor waiting for a patient to describe his symptoms. He was giving me the space to begin. "Thank you for meeting me," I finally managed to say. The words felt small and inadequate. "You said you had information," Victor replied, his gaze returning to my face. "About Section 9. "I do," I said, my hand resting on the yellow paper, protecting it. I wrote it all down, everything I remember." It seemed better than trying to say it out loud. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes it is. You were a ranger?" 35 years, I confirmed. "I was on patrol in '88, a solo loop. That's when it happened." "What happened, Paul?" His question was gentle but direct. There was no judgment in his voice, only a quiet insistence on the facts. I took a deep breath, the smell of old coffee filling my lungs. "I saw something that doesn't fit. It's the reason I left the service early. It's the reason well, it's all in there." I pushed the legal pad across the table. It slid a few inches and stopped beside his water glass. My hand felt strangely light without it. Victor looked at the manuscript, then back at me. "Before I read this," he said, "can you tell me one thing? When you were on your patrol, did you notice anything unusual about the game trails, anything out of the ordinary?" The question was so specific, so technical, it threw me off. I had been expecting him to ask if I was crazy. The game trails? I searched my memory, the images from that day flooding back. Yes, they were wrong. They were broken, not in a natural way. Something heavy had moved through there, but it didn't follow the paths. It made its own. It snapped branches 6, 7 feet off the ground, like it didn't care about making noise or being seen. A flicker of something crossed Victor's face. It was the first crack in his professional mask. It wasn't surprise, but recognition. "The team that found Christopher's campsite," he said, his voice low. "They reported the same thing. Trails that were ignored, branches snapped high up in the trees. The official report called it probable bear activity, but it didn't fit. The breaks were too clean." I stared at him. For 30 years, my story had existed in a vacuum, a singular, impossible event. Now, a piece of it had found an echo in the present day. It was terrifying and, in a strange way, validating. I wasn't just a crazy old man with a story. It wasn't a bear, I whispered. The words came out with a certainty that chilled me. Victor held my gaze for a long moment. He picked up the manuscript. He didn't flip through it. He held it with a kind of reverence, as if he understood the cost of what I had written down. He slid it into a worn leather briefcase he had placed on the seat beside him. "I'm going to read this tonight, Paul," he said, zipping the briefcase shut. "Every word. I'll call you tomorrow." He stood up, put a few dollars on the table for his water, and nodded at me one last time. "Thank you for calling," he said, and then he was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space on the table where the manuscript had been. The weight in my chest was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the dead weight of a secret. It was the buzzing, anxious weight of hope, and I didn't know which one was heavier. I drove home from the diner in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my old truck so tightly my knuckles were white. The world outside the windshield seemed distant, unreal. The familiar streets of my small town, the mailboxes, the picket fences, it all felt like a movie set. My real world was now contained in that leather briefcase with Victor, a world of deep shadows and a silence that screamed. When I got home, the house felt too big, too empty. I made a cup of tea. I didn't drink and sat in my armchair, staring at the wall. The silence in my living room was nothing like the silence in the woods. This was a hollow silence, the absence of sound. That silence, back in '88, had been a presence. It was thick, heavy, like a blanket smothering every cricket and bird for miles. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that trail. I could feel the cool, damp air on my skin, smell the rich scent of pine and wet earth. I could feel the weight of that silence pressing in on me, and I could feel the eyes. I never saw them, not then, but I felt them. It was a physical sensation, like a change in air pressure. My old mentor, a man named Arthur who had been a ranger since the '40s, used to tell me, "The woods keep their own secrets, Paul. You don't go looking for them. They find you when they're ready." I guess they had found me that day. And now, 30 years later, it felt like they were finding me all over again. I finally dozed off in my armchair just as the sun was starting to lighten the sky. My sleep filled with dreams of impossibly tall trees and the sound of something massive moving just out of sight. The phone rang at 10 o'clock the next morning. The sound was so jarring it made me jump, spilling the cold tea on my shirt. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up, my hand unsteady. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse. "Paul, it's Victor." His voice was calm, professional, but there was an undercurrent of something else there, something I couldn't quite place. Tension, maybe. "Did I wake you?" No, I was up," I lied. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers rustling. "I read it, Paul. I stayed up all night and read it 3 times. I waited, my breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the moment he would tell me I was a crazy old fool. "Your account of what you saw," he started, his voice dropping lower. The way it moved, the sounds it made, the sheer scale of it. "You described things that match evidence from Christopher's sight, details that were never made public. The way the saplings were twisted, not broken. The depth of the tracks in the mossy ground, far too deep for any known animal. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful my knees felt weak. I sank back into my armchair. He believed me, or at least he wasn't dismissing me. "I told you," I whispered. "It wasn't a bear." "No," Victor said, and the word was heavy with certainty. "It wasn't a bear." He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "There's something else you should know. Christopher wasn't just a casual hiker, he was a primatologist. A discredited one, maybe, but a brilliant one. He lost his university tenure because of his unconventional theories. He believed a relict population of Gigantopithecus could still exist in the remote parts of North America. I didn't know what that word meant, but I understood the implication. So he was looking for it. "I think so," Victor said. He wasn't alone either. He was supposed to meet a colleague up there, a man named Dennis. Christopher went in first to set up a base camp. Dennis was supposed to follow 2 days later, but he never went. He claimed he got sick at the last minute. We interviewed him, of course. His story was shaky, but we had nothing to hold him on. A new character. A new piece of a puzzle I never wanted to be a part of. "What do you want from me, Victor?" I asked, my voice tired. "I need your help, Paul," he said, his tone shifting from informative to urgent. "The official search has been scaled back. They're calling it a recovery mission now, not a rescue. But I'm not giving up. You know that terrain better than anyone. I want you to look at the search grids, at the topographical maps. I want you to tell me where a man would go to hide, or where something would take a man to keep him hidden." The blood drained from my face. Going back there, even on a map, felt like a betrayal of the promise I had made to myself 30 years ago, to leave it alone, to walk away and never look back. "I can't," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I'm sorry. I told you my story. That's all I can do. I'm not that man anymore. I'm 73 years old. I understand," Victor said softly. There was no pressure in his voice, only a deep, profound disappointment that was somehow worse. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "Paul, Christopher has a daughter. Her name is Sarah. She's 16. She calls my office every single day. She just wants to know what happened to her father. I think you're the only person alive who might have a real answer." I closed my eyes. An image of a young girl waiting by the phone flashed in my mind. For 30 years, this secret was mine. It was a weight I carried alone. Now, he was asking me to share it, not for my own peace of mind, but for hers. The silence on the line stretched on, filled with the ghosts of the forest. Arthur's words echoed in my head. The woods keep their own secrets. But what happens when one of those secrets swallows a man whole and leaves a child behind? What do you owe the living? I hung up the phone, but my hand stayed on the receiver, my knuckles white. The plastic felt cold against my palm. Sarah, a 16-year-old girl. For 30 years, the thing in the woods was a memory, a ghost that belonged only to me. It was my burden, my secret. But now it had a new name. It had a face I'd never seen, a daughter waiting for a father who wasn't coming home. The weight in my chest shifted, becoming something sharper, something with an edge. It was no longer just the quiet dread of memory. It was the loud, ringing bell of responsibility. I pushed myself out of the armchair and walked over to the window, looking out at the neat, tidy lawn I mowed every Tuesday. It all seemed like a lie. The manicured grass, the painted fence, the quiet street. A flimsy stage built to hide the vast, untamed wilderness that was always just a few miles away. A wilderness that didn't care about lawns or fences. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, moving through my house like a ghost. I found myself in the spare room, standing in front of an old footlocker. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers fumbled with the rusty latches before they finally gave way with a groan. The smell that rose up was of canvas, worn leather, and pine. My old patrol gear, my pack, my compass, my bedroll. Tucked into a side pocket of the pack was a folded, yellowed map of the Cascade National Forest, Section 7, the area I patrolled back in '88. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The paper was soft, almost like cloth, creased with 1,000 folds. My own pencil marks were still there, notations about creek levels and fallen trees. And there, in the northern quadrant, a small X I had marked with a shaky hand, the spot where the silence had been the loudest, the spot where I had seen it. I ran my finger over the X, and a jolt went through me, cold and electric. I felt the moss under my boots, the damp air on my face. I heard the snap of a branch the size of my thigh, a sound that wasn't like wood breaking but like bone. I quickly folded the map, my heart pounding, and shoved it back into the locker, slamming the lid shut. The sound echoed in the quiet house. "I can't," I said out loud, my voice a stranger's. "I'm too old. It's not my fight." But the words felt hollow. They were the words of a coward, and I knew it. I had spent 30 years trying to convince myself that walking away had been the smart thing to do, the only thing to do. But was it? I had survived, yes, but I had left a piece of myself back there in the shadow of that X on the map. I had let the fear win. Arthur's voice came back to me, clear as if he were standing in the room. "The woods keep their own secrets, Paul. They find you when they're ready. Maybe they weren't ready for me back then. Maybe I was just a witness, someone who was meant to see and remember. But now they had found Christopher, and in doing so they had found me again. The secret was no longer just sitting in the woods. It was active. It had taken someone. It had left a hole in the world, a hole shaped like a father. I thought about Sarah, calling Victor's office every day. I imagined her voice, young and full of a hope that was probably fading with each passing hour. What was my 30-year-old fear compared to her fresh, raw grief? What was my comfort worth when a child had lost her world? I had run from the truth once. I couldn't do it again. My silence had been a shield for me, but now it was a wall between that girl and any chance of an answer. The decision settled over me, not with a crash, but with a quiet, grim acceptance. I walked back to the living room, my steps feeling heavier, older. I picked up the phone. My hand was steady this time. I dialed the number Victor had left me. He answered on the first ring. "Victor," I said, my voice low but firm. There was no need for introductions. "Paul," he replied. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a man who had been waiting. "I'll look at the maps," I said. "Send them over. The topographicals, the search grids, everything you have." There was a moment of silence on his end, and I could almost hear the relief in it. "Thank you, Paul. I'll have them messengered to you immediately. They'll be there within the hour." "One more thing, Victor," I said, my eyes drifting back to the window, to the dark line of trees on the distant horizon. "Anything." "I'm not going back in there," I stated, the words tasting like a promise and a prayer. "I'll help you from here. I'll give you everything I know, everything I remember. But my boots don't touch that soil again. Am I clear?" "Perfectly clear, Paul," he said, his voice filled with a new respect. "Perfectly clear." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beautiful, deceptive calm before the night. I knew what was coming. The maps would arrive, and with them, the ghosts. I was inviting the wilderness back into my home, into my life. The silence I had cultivated for 3 decades was about to be broken, and I was terrified. The package arrived less than an hour later, delivered by a young man in a courier uniform who looked barely old enough to drive. He handed me a large, flat cardboard portfolio, got my signature, and left without a word. For a moment, I just stood in my doorway holding it. It felt heavier than it should have, heavy with responsibility, heavy with the past. I brought it inside and laid it on my dining room table, the one I hadn't eaten at in years. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, which seemed appropriate. I wiped it clean with the sleeve of my flannel shirt and untied the strings on the portfolio. Inside were a dozen maps, large-scale topographicals, satellite images overlaid with grids and smaller detailed charts of specific zones. The paper was crisp and new, smelling of ink and the sterile environment of an office. I spread the main topographical map of Section 7 across the entire table. It was the same area as the old folded map in my footlocker, but this version was different. It was a stranger. The familiar ridges and valleys were rendered in cold, precise contour lines. The creeks were thin blue veins. It was the forest dissected and pinned down like a butterfly in a collection, all of its wildness and mystery stripped away. Yet, as I looked at it, the wildness came flooding back into me. I could feel the chill of the air at that elevation, hear the wind sighing through the tops of the ancient firs. Victor had also included the search and rescue grids. They were marked in red ink on a clear plastic overlay. I could see the logic of their patterns, the systematic sweeping of the most likely areas. Trails, waterways, clearings. They had covered the ground where a lost hiker would be found. But Christopher wasn't just a lost hiker, and whatever had found him wasn't a normal predator. A bear or a cougar might drag its prey, but it wouldn't go to great lengths to hide it. It wouldn't think. This thing did. I knew that in my bones. It was intelligent. It was territorial. And it was elusive in a way that defied human logic. I spent the next 2 days with those maps. I barely ate. I slept in my armchair when exhaustion finally took me. My world shrank to the lines and symbols on the paper. I traced the paths of the search teams with my finger, and I saw where they went wrong. They were thinking like men looking for a man. They were searching the horizontal plane. But the forest, especially that part of the Cascades, is a vertical world. It's a world of deep, tangled ravines, of sheer rock faces hidden by curtains of vegetation, of ancient blowdowns that create caves of shadow and logs. They were looking in the places a man could fall. They weren't looking in the places a man could be taken. I pulled out my old, yellowed map again. I flattened it on the table next to the new one, the 2 versions of the same truth lying side by side. My shaky X from 30 years ago was in a region the search teams had barely touched. It was too remote, too difficult. No trails led there. From a logistical standpoint, it was considered low probability. But from my standpoint, it was the only place that made sense. I remembered the feeling of being watched that day, the crushing weight of the silence. It wasn't just in one spot. It was a territory, a vast, possessive presence. And my ex was right in the heart of it. I closed my eyes, and I was back there. I remembered the sound that had sent me running. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was a deep, resonant boom, like a giant hitting the ground with a club the size of a tree. It wasn't a sound of anger, it was a sound of ownership, a declaration. This is mine. And then I remembered the smell, a thick, musky odor like damp fur and rotting earth, a smell that clung to the air and made the hair on my arms stand up. The search reports mentioned nothing of this. They were clinical. No tracks found, no unusual signs of predation. They were looking for evidence that fit their training. They weren't trained for this. My finger traced a line from where Christopher's abandoned campsite was found, heading northwest, directly toward my ex. It crossed a rushing creek, a natural barrier that would deter most searchers, and then went straight up the side of a steep, almost impassable ridge, known locally as the Widow's Spine. No sane person would climb it, but it was the most direct route. It was the path something immensely powerful and unconcerned with human trails would take. I looked at the topographical lines. On the other side of the Widow's Spine was a small, deep valley, a bowl carved out by an ancient glacier. It was almost completely inaccessible, surrounded on three sides by sheer cliffs. A natural fortress, a perfect hiding place. I looked at the search grids again. A single helicopter had flown over it. From the air, it would have looked like nothing more than an unbroken canopy of trees. They had never put boots on the ground there. The woods keep their own secrets, Paul. Arthur's voice was so clear in my mind it made me flinch. They find you when they're ready. The secret had taken Christopher, and now it felt like I was the only one who could find it. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. The thought of anyone going into that valley made my blood run cold. But the image of Sarah, the 16-year-old girl, was stronger. She deserved to know. She deserved more than a file stamped missing, presumed deceased. I sat back in my chair, the house silent around me. The decision was made. I had seen the path. It wasn't on their maps, but it was clear as day on mine. It was a path of memory and fear. I reached for the phone, my hand no longer trembling. It was steady. I knew what I had to do. I had to send them back in. I had to send them to the one place I had sworn I would never think of again. I dialed Victor's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Victor," I said, my voice raspy from 2 days of disuse. "It's Paul, I know where he is." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. So long I thought for a second he'd hung up. I could hear the faint, sterile hum of an office, a world away from the deep, living silence of the Cascades. When Victor finally spoke, his voice was tight, controlled. "Paul, you're sure? You know what you're asking me to do? I'd have to pull my teams from 3 other grids. The Widow's Spine. It's not just difficult, it's considered a no-go zone without proper climbing gear. We'd be risking lives on a 30-year-old hunch." "It's not a hunch, Victor," I said, my own voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to the younger man who had marked that X on the map. "It's a memory, a very clear one. Your teams are looking for a man who got lost. You need to be looking for a man who was taken. That thing, it wouldn't stay on a trail. It would take the most direct route, and it wouldn't care about a cliff. To it, that ridge is a staircase." I heard him sigh, a sound of pure exhaustion and frustration. I could picture him in his command center, surrounded by maps and radios, the immense weight of a young man's life on his shoulders. "A staircase," he repeated, not with disbelief, but with a kind of weary wonder. "Okay, Paul. Okay. I'll divert a team. A 4-man special unit, climbers. They're my best. But I need you on the phone. I need you to walk them through it, landmark by landmark, from your memory." "I'll do better," I said, looking at the 2 maps side by side on my table. "I'll give you the exact coordinates of a place to start looking. A small clearing just past the creek at the base of the spine. Tell them to look for abnormalities, things that don't belong." "Abnormalities," he said. "Right. They'll move out at first light tomorrow. That's the best I can do." "That's all I'm asking," I replied, and hung up the phone. The night that followed was the longest of my life. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the forest of '88. I felt the damp chill on my skin, smelled the thick, musky odor that wasn't bear or deer or anything I had a name for. I heard that sound, that deep, booming impact that shook the ground and my bones along with it. It was the sound of something so big and so powerful that the laws of the normal world didn't seem to apply to it. I had run from that sound. Now, 30 years later, I was sending 4 young men walking right toward it. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest. I was a coward, using other men's courage to face a demon. I couldn't face myself. I spent the night in my armchair, the maps spread out under the dim light of a single lamp. I stared at my shaky X, at the cold, precise lines of the widow's spine. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Who do you pray to when the thing you're afraid of feels older than any god you were ever taught to believe in? The next day was a slow-motion torture. Victor called at 6 a.m. "They're on their way, Paul. Call sign is Ridgeback. I'll patch you through if they find anything." The hours crawled by. I made coffee I didn't drink. I stared out the window at the distant, peaceful-looking mountains. It was a beautiful day, clear and blue. A perfect day for a hike. A perfect day to die. I felt like a general in a bunker, moving pieces on a map, completely disconnected from the cold, hard reality of the terrain. I traced the route with my finger again and again, up the spine, over the crest, and down into that hidden bowl-shaped valley. A fortress. A lair. At 3:15 p.m., the phone rang, startling me so badly I knocked over my cold cup of coffee. It was Victor. His voice was different. The professional calm was gone, replaced by something else, something sharp. "Paul, they're at the base of the spine, by the creek, just like you said." "And?" My throat was dry. "And they found something." He paused. "A boot. A single hiking boot. Christopher's size and brand. It was wedged under a rock in the middle of the creek." I closed my eyes. "Is that all?" "No," Victor said, his voice dropping lower. "The laces were snapped. Not cut, not frayed, snapped clean in two like a piece of thread." My blood ran cold. I knew what it took to snap a modern hiking boot lace. It took incredible, impossible force. "Paul, there's more." About 20 yards into the trees on the slope of the spine, they found marks on a tree. "What kind of marks?" I whispered. "Scratches," Victor said. "Deep gouges in the bark, about 9 feet off the ground, and there are branches broken higher up, much higher. The team leader said it looks like something huge just pushed its way straight up the slope, breaking branches the size of a man's arm as it went." I didn't need him to say anything else. I knew. It was the path, the direct route. No animal I knew of would do that. No animal would leave a single boot and then climb a cliff face. This was intelligent. This was territorial. It was taking him home. "Tell them to be careful, Victor," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell them the silence is the first warning. If the woods go quiet, they need to be ready." "Ready for what, Paul?" he asked, his voice raw with tension. I looked at the X on my old map, a mark that had haunted my dreams for 3 decades. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest thing I had ever said. "I just know that when I heard it, I ran, and I never looked back." The silence on the phone was heavier than the one in the forest. It was a man-made silence, filled with unspoken questions and the hum of electronics. Victor didn't press me. He just let my admission hang in the air between us. "Stay on the line, Paul," he said finally, his voice strained. "I'm patching their audio through to my headset. I'll relay what they say." I sat there, a ghost in my own home, listening to the secondhand sounds of 4 men walking into the memory that had owned me for 30 years. For the next hour, I heard nothing but Victor's occasional terse updates. "They're starting the ascent. They're at the first ledge. They say the trail of broken branches is consistent. It goes straight up." I pictured it perfectly. A brutal, vertical path, impossible for a man, but not for the thing I saw. Then, Victor's breathing changed. It became shallow. "Paul, Ridgeback lead is talking. He says it just went quiet." "All of it?" I asked, my own chest tightening. "Yes. He said the insects, the birds, everything. It's dead silent up there, just like you said. My job had been to protect the forest and the people in it, but I had sent them there." I felt a wave of nausea. "Tell them to check their surroundings. Tell them to look up." I heard Victor relay the message. A few seconds passed. Then a sharp intake of breath from Victor. "Oh my God. What is it, Victor? What do they see?" "They found a backpack," he said, his voice a choked whisper. "It's him. It's the kids. It's hanging from a branch." about 30 feet up a sheer rock face. There's no way a person could have gotten it up there. The X on my map seemed to burn on the table. It was a marker for a grave I never had the courage to visit. Is the boy there? No, just the pack. Wait. Ridgeback lead is saying something else. There's a smell. He says it's strong, like wet fur and something rotten. I knew that smell. It was the scent of a predator's den, a primordial odor that bypassed the brain and went straight to the oldest part of your soul, the part that knows to run. Get them out of there, Victor, I said, my voice urgent. Now. The pack is a warning. It's a territorial marker. They're professionals, Paul. He started but was cut off. I heard a muffled shout through his headset, then the crackle of static. Ridgeback? Ridgeback. Report. What's your status? The silence stretched for 10, then 20 seconds. It was the longest minute of my life. I was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles were white. Then a voice came through, frantic and breathless. It was the team leader. We have rocks falling from above. Repeat, rocks falling. It's not a slide. Something is throwing them. I could hear the panic in his voice, the terror of a trained man facing something outside of any training manual. I heard another shout, a man yelling in pain. What's happening? I yelled into the phone. They're retreating, Victor shouted back, his voice breaking. They say something is pacing them from the ridge above, staying in the shadows. It's huge. They can't get a clear look at it, but it's keeping pace with them as they descend. They're saying it's not trying to hit them, it's guiding them, pushing them back down the mountain. It wasn't hunting them. It was escorting them off its property, the same way a farmer might fire a warning shot at trespassers. A cold, intelligent, and utterly dominant display of power. Where is the boy? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a pause. I heard the sounds of the team scrambling, the sharp crack of a rifle shot that sounded tiny and useless against the vastness of the mountains. Then Victor spoke, his voice hollow, defeated. Paul, just before the rocks started, they saw a cave, high up on the cliff face near where the pack was. They put a scope on it. They saw movement inside, and they found the boy. My heart stopped. Is he alive? No, Victor said softly. He wasn't in the cave. He was placed outside of it, like an offering, or a warning. I closed my eyes, the image searing itself into my mind, the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. That thing hadn't killed Christopher out of malice. It had taken him, and now it had taken another. It wasn't a monster. It was something far more terrifying. It was a resident. The official report cited a tragic climbing accident, a freak rock slide. The team from Ridgeback was debriefed, sworn to secrecy under some national security clause. Victor and I never spoke of it again. We didn't have to. We were members of a club of two bound by a truth we could never share. Sarah got her brother's body back, and a story that let her mourn. It was a lie, but maybe it was a kinder truth than the one I carried. I still live in the shadow of those mountains. Sometimes, on a clear night, I look up at the widow's spine, a dark scar against the stars. I don't feel fear anymore, just a profound and terrible respect. I had spent my life believing I was a guardian of the wilderness, but I was wrong. I was just a guest who, on a quiet afternoon in 1988, had stumbled into the landlord's private chambers and had been running ever since. Sharing this story doesn't make the weight any lighter. It just confirms that it's real. The woods keep their own secrets, and I know now they don't just find you when they're ready. They find you when they want you to know you're not alone, and that is the most terrifying secret of all.